Good evening. Captain Retired Matt Edwards here with the next installment of my Facebook Live weekly observation post report. Now, what I'll probably do tonight is do some points, and then I'll bring up to speed about a couple of conversations I had this week, or attempted conversations. I was trying to get a hold of my member of parliament unsuccessfully. Anyway, without further ado, from my files list, where I have this file called numbered draft of issues, for this Facebook Live, number 273, the Interpretation Act, Section 12, added to the Member of Parliament letter, and the BWA Pension Act. Now, the Interpretation Act, and I have it right here, so I'll read it out to you, and I'll explain what it's supposed to be. You see, all laws passed by a democratic government are supposed to try to solve problems. So we have the ultimate law in Canada, and many other countries have a constitution as their prime law, the main law. Now, underneath the constitution are ordinary acts. But before you get to that, they have an act called the Interpretation Act that tells you how to interpret the laws that they pass. Section 12 says enactments remedial. Now, remedial, that means they're trying to fix something. Every enactment, Section 12, every enactment is deemed remedial. Now, deeming is a technique that the government uses when they want it to be absolutely certain. No one can argue it. If someone said that the Income Tax Act is not remedial, well, they'd point to the Interpretation Act, Section 12, and they'd say, well, we deemed it to be remedial, so there's no choice. You can't argue that it's not remedial. And shall be given such fair, large, and liberal construction and interpretation as best ensures the attainment of its objects. Now, what does that mean? That means they're not supposed to look at laws with a narrow and technical point of view and try to interpret in such a way to deny people access to remedies. That's what it means. It's almost the same thing as equity law, right? Equity law is supposed to look at justice, not technicalities. So if you were looking at, say, the Veterans Wellbeing Act Regulation, Section 22, and the fact that they put in there clawbacks for things like the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act. Now, even though the Veterans Wellbeing Act is deemed remedial, aren't the regulations remedial? You see, this gives an avenue of attack, that you would look at this and you'd say, well, what is the purpose of the Veterans Wellbeing Act? And then they'd look at what's written, because there's very little Hansard evidence of debate in Parliament, so they would look at what's written in the Act. And they'd see that it's supposed to be a means of compensation for a person who is disabled and serves Canada. Now, then they'd say, well, what about Section 22 of the Veterans Wellbeing Act regulations? Does that fit within the spirit and intent of the Act? It doesn't, because it doesn't help the veteran. It doesn't remedy the veteran's problems. So even though they put it in there, they put it in there to help themselves and not help people who are injured in service. You see? Now, moving on. I said I was talking about the Veterans Wellbeing Act and the Pension Act. Now, the Pension Act, you see, a lot of people falsely believe that the Pension Act is about pain and suffering. Now, the Pension Act is not about pain and suffering, and don't ask me, ask the judge in the War Amputation of Canada, Ontario Court of Appeal, 1997 case. And they looked at the Hansard, which I mentioned before, as the record of parliamentary debate, and they looked at the Woods Committee from 1966, and they said that, basically it's to compensate the veteran for their injury in service because they can't be employed in the general labor market. That isn't pain and suffering, you see? So, who wants to call it pain and suffering? The government wanted to find a way, I believe, to let Dennis Minogue win his lawsuit and still, drag their heels on other clawbacks. You see? They wanted to carve out the Pension Act clawback from the Service Income Support Insurance Plan. And although I have it in another note for later discussion, I'll mention this. People who were part of the Dennis Minogue class action, or maybe people who think I'm stirring up shit, might not like this. The judge, Justice Robin Burns of the Dennis Minogue class action, he said that the Service Income Support Insurance Plan is an indemnity for lost income. Now, if that is your judgment, Judge, that means he's authorizing the federal government under the Veterans Affairs Department to deduct the Service Income Support Insurance Plan under Section 25 of the Pension Act, because that claws back other forms of compensation. So, no one has noticed because they didn't do it, but I'm trying to point out the absurdity of the ruling when, in fact, the judge had it backwards. The Service Income Support Insurance Plan, Policy 901-102, is a non-indemnity, not compensation. It merely pays as per a contract's formula. The Pension Act, however, is an indemnity. It compensates for the lack of ability to work in the labor market. That's it. Now, are you allowed to get legally a non-indemnity and an indemnity payment at the same time? Yes. Doesn't matter which one is which. As long as one compensates you, one doesn't compensate you, there's nothing wrong. Now, if you get two forms of compensation, then one might try to deduct the other. But that brings up a Pandora's box of who gets to deduct who. If the Service Income Support Insurance Plan was an indemnity for lost income, like the judge said, then they would be well within their rights to take into account the Pension Act, which is an indemnity for not being able to work and earn an income. That's the way it would be, except for the fact that Parliament put into the Pension Act Section 30 that says nobody can intercept the Pension Act pension. So even though, legally they might have been able to do it had the Parliament of Canada, when they wrote the Pension Act in 1919, they put a get your fucking hands off of this payment clause. Number 274. Now this is something that affected me. And what happened was I was getting, Manulife, the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, cut me off in 2017. But between 2014 and 2017, I had my Canada Pension Plan disability deducted from both my Sun Life, where I work for CRA. I had this insurance that covered my civilian salary, and Manulife, they deducted it because I was getting the insurance that's supposed to cover my military salary. Now, I came across this policy, and I'll read it out to you, because I have a picture of it there. At least I did a few moments ago. Basically, it's a policy that says, in the Treasury Board Insurance Administration Manual, I believe, and it says that if you have two positions with the federal government, that's like me. I worked with CRA, and I served in the military. So I had two positions in the military, and then I became disabled. Now, this policy states that when this happens, both salaries are put together and only one insurance company pays. Now, here's the advantage of that if they had done it for me. I wouldn't have had two deductions of the Canada Pension Plan disability. Sun Life was deducting it, Manulife was deducting it, and therefore I was losing the value twice. Now, if only one of these two companies was paying, then they could obviously only take it into account one time. So I thought this was a very elegant solution, and I told Manulife, listen, you guys are 75% of lost salary, and the other people are only 70%, so I think that you should be the one paying both salaries, because they would have had to put my $55,000 a year I was making with CRA with my military salary, and then they would have had to pay me 75% of both. Of course, Manulife said, that doesn't apply to us. Now, the reason that they say it doesn't apply to Manulife is that the policy gives an example which uses the two civilian long-term disability insurance. So they use the Public Service Management Insurance Plan, which is called disability insurance, and, long-term disability. That's what LTD is, their acronym for their program. And the union-based Sun Life policy, which they call disability insurance, or DI. So the example says if you get both DI and LTD, we'll take both of your salaries, and then only one of these two insurances will pay. That's a pretty big technicality when you have 4 different federal government programs. You have the Public Service Management Insurance Plan for non-unionized and members of parliament and managers. You have the Sun Life policy for unionized public servants. You have the RCMP Great West Life policy, which is similar to the military's policy. And you have the military's policy, which is CISA policy 901-102. So all 4 federal government programs opt to follow the Treasury Board policy because they're all Treasury Board sponsored programs. Now that's my 2 cents. It would have solved that one problem, and it would have pissed off Manulife because they wanted to take half of the Canada Pension Plan, and they put pressure on me by taking all of my Canada Pension Plan until I would agree to let them take 50% voluntarily, which I didn't agree to. I said they can go fuck themselves. I said Sun Life was there first. They made me apply to get it. Manulife came in late into the picture, and they wanted to get a windfall because they didn't start paying me until 2013. I was getting Sun Life since 2009. So really, who had the better claim for the Canada Pension Plan? Now add to that the case, because I am a veterans advocate. Now, I don't normally screw my face up like this, but I'm trying to make it a little bit more interesting instead of just looking at me blankly talking. So, I'm a veterans advocate, and I came across a veteran in Edmonton, and he was a reservist like me. He was a captain like me. Unlike me, he went to Afghanistan. He also worked for CRA, like me. When he developed PTSD and then lost his job with CRA and had his position taken away from him in the military, he ended up on both Sun Life and Manulife, or he would have, and he applied for the Canada Pension Plan Disability and was approved. Now, instead of Manulife and Sun Life splitting it 50-50, in his case, Manulife took 100% of it, Sun Life agreed to take nothing, so it averaged out to 50% each. Now, I said that to the Manulife fuckers that I was dealing with. I said, seeing that they did this up in Edmonton for that other veteran, Sun Life is taking 100%, so why don't you take a flying fucking leap into a lake? Because then it'll average out to 50% each, won't it? Of course, they wouldn't agree. Now, getting back to my points. Number 275. Now, I've covered this a dozen times, I swear. But I'll mention it again because it must have popped up into my head and I wrote it down. Tendering issue. Now, normally people understand that the government tenders contracts because they're supposed to accept the lowest bidder, But is the subject of a tender the administration of the government's own insurance, which is administrative service only, or to underwrite the insurance, you see? So, sorry, Shannon, I don't know how, and it might screw up my rhythm or whatever it is. So, send me a message or something later, or if I figure it out later, maybe I'll try it. But right now, I'm not capable technically. So, this has been reported on at least 3 times by government reports that I know. There was the 2003 Senate committee, or maybe it was a federal government, House Commons committee, but I believe it was the Senate. And they wanted to know why it hasn't been tendered in 40 odd years. And then the people that were there for the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, they said, Manulife's doing such a good job that, we're going to keep it that way. You can't do that with a publicly tendered should have been publicly tendered program, you can't. Now, the next time it came up in the Senate Committee on National Defense and Veterans Affairs, they said, well, there's nobody else that can do this. So we're going to stick with these people manually, because they're the only people that have the expertise to do it. What a load of horseshit. Okay, remember I said before the Public Service Management Insurance Plan? That's a plan that could do the military if they were awarded the tender. Now, that goes to Industrial Alliance. Then you have the RCMP policy, that's Great West Life. They could probably do it. And then you have the Sun Life policy, which is the Federal Public Servants Insurance. They could probably do it. So basically what I've come to the conclusion is that the government doesn't want to tender it because they are actually the insurance underwriter. So if they had to tender it, would be they just put out a tender and say, hey guys, we need someone to administer our own policy. We're insuring all of the federal government, the 4 different plans, and we need someone only to do the administration, not to underwrite, take the risk of profit or loss, the policy. Now, how do I know that the government is the underwriter? Because it was stated categorically in the Manus Federal Court 2012 case. And it was also stated, just to make things doubly clear, in the Butte Estate Federal Court 2012 case, which was again McInnes Cooper representing the RCMP disabled veterans who had the Pension Act pension deducted from the RCMP's group long-term disability. See? So the 2 federal government programs that had the Pension Act being deducted from it, they have already been in court, and in both cases, Manulife and Great West Life were not sued. Now, the government was said to be the underwriter in both policies. Now, what do you think the odds are that Sun Life and the Industrial Alliance policy, the Public Service Management Insurance Plan, what do you think the odds are that they are actually underwritten by Sun Life and Industrial Alliance? I'd say close to 0. Why do I say that? Because the government never buys insurance. If you ran into an Army truck or an RCMP car, you have to get compensated from Treasury Board, not an insurance. They don't. They have a policy not to buy insurance. That's a fact. Now, number 276. Review my pinned posts for ensuring I'm not forgetting anything important. Now, what I've done on my group, I've been posting things since 2015 or 2016 into my main group observation post. And I put, they might have changed the name on it, but pinned post was one thing. Now I think they might have another name on it. But I've been putting comments to the main post so that I can put in things that I want to remember. So I might put a picture of a case, or I might put a few words that I want to quote put in there. So every now and then something jogs my memory and I forget something. I remember something that I had forgotten. Now, it might not seem important, or it might seem important, and that's why I forgot, I guess. Now, moving on to number 277. I think I might stop there and then carry on with the other part of the report I plan to do and give you an update about who I had spoken to this week and what's going on. Okay, 277. Punitive damages and tax/insurance. Increases the risk of losing more than just compensation to make you whole. Now, if someone runs into you with a car, they would have insurance, hopefully, because you're required to have insurance just for that reason. Now, you would sue the driver and you would get paid compensation in tort to make you whole. If you're a civilian working at an employer, then back in the 20s or 30s or the 1910s, sometime in the past, about 100 years ago, they came up with what they called a Great Compromise. And the right to sue by the worker was traded to the employer for the right to administrative compensation. Now, straight up barter. The thing is, I got to get back and see where my mind was going with that. So, if you have an insurance, you buy it for peace of mind. Now, peace of mind means someone don't fuck you over, right? You bought the insurance so that if the risk happens, you have the insurance to make sure you didn't lose everything. When an insurance screws someone over really badly, because it doesn't happen every case, you can get awarded punitive damages, which the purpose is not to compensate and make you whole, but it is a quasi-criminal type damages meant to send a message to society not to do this ever fucking again. You see? So, two cases that come to mind are Sun Life versus Fiddler, 2005 Supreme Court of Canada, and 2003 Witten versus Pilot Insurance. Now, in one of those cases, and I really don't recall, I had to review, but in one of those cases, their house burned down. They had home insurance. The insurance company thought they burned it down. They thought it was a case of arson, and they refused to pay. So the people didn't have the money to live on. They didn't have the peace of mind. They ended up going bankrupt. So when they finally won in court, they got 3 times as much money in punitive damages plus their compensatory damages, you see. So now take that to the service income support insurance plan and possibly the income replacement benefit. I had a chat with an office of the Veterans Ombudsman lady I always talk to. I haven't spoken to her for a while, so I spent about an hour talking to her the other day. And I explained to her how I believe the income replacement benefit is an insurance that instead of premiums, service is the premium, and that you're supposed to have compensation if the risk happens. Now, the government added an additional condition that you had to have been injured in service, but if you have been injured in service, you ought to get the insurance because the risk happened, and what's happening is that they put clawbacks in there. I said, look, if you have a clawback in there, and the person has enough clawbacks that they don't get the income replacement benefit because they had the Canadian Forces pension, they had the service income support insurance plan, maybe they got the Canada Pension Plan Disability, so by the time all of the things are computed, well, we would have paid you, but you had too much income. Now, that is cruel and unusual punishment to someone who has been injured in service. It disrespects the fact that they took a bullet or whatever for Canada. Because even though they got injured in the service of Canada, the government's saying, well, we're not going to pay you any compensation. It's crazy. That's what I told her. So I believe that the government could get sued for punitive damages on the income replacement benefit or the service income support insurance plan. Dennis Manuza's class action. They should have got punitive damages because insurance was purchased for peace of mind. They didn't have peace of mind because the Pension Act was used to either reduce the payment or eliminate it altogether. Now, people might say that's what always happens. It's not supposed to happen that way. Consolidated Bathurst, Consolidated Boiler, 1978 Supreme Court of Canada case. It was about maintenance, a warranty, which is like insurance on a big old paper boiler in a factory or paper plant. The judge said that the insurance company, an insurer, is not supposed to collect the premiums without any risk of having to pay the insurance. So all of these clawbacks is a violation of that common law precedent because they put the clawbacks in there so they can avoid paying, and you bought the insurance so that you would get paid. You see the problem? So they also mentioned that the insured person shouldn't have unreasonable expectations and expect to get something, even though, they probably shouldn't. But I think they're just trying to say, here's some points for this side of the argument, and here's some points for the other side of the argument. But who holds the most power in the insurer-insured relationship? It's always the insurance company, because they can withhold payments like they did in that house burning down case. You see? So anyway, I think that'll do for these points. Now, this week, I've been unsuccessfully trying to get a hold of my member of parliament because I've been triggered about that stupid privacy point since I spoke to Ruth at the office last week sometime. And I was explaining to her about the problem about the government should be using Section 08JUN23 of the Privacy Act, because Parliament in 1982 put an exemption in there for the use of a consent form to disclose personal information collected by the government. Now, the members of Parliament in 1982 did not have to put a freebie, a get-out-of-jail-free card for themselves into that act. And the fact that they put it there, at least in my expert opinion, means they should use it in most cases. Why would they allow a department, and they use Canada Revenue Agency, which caused me to try to call the Chief Executive Officer, Bob Hamilton. I never got through to him either. I tried to call the minister, Laboutier, her name is. Okay, so my member of Parliament staffer said that CRA always requires these people to fill out a form when they want to help a constituent. And the thing is, as I said, Ruth, if that happens, it means that you're helping someone break the law. You don't have to use a consent form because you're a member of Parliament. And you're violating Section 08JUN23 by collecting a consent form when there's a specific exception in the law just made for you by you. And they don't seem to get it. That's why it's driving me up the wall. I have a condition that I've never made any bones about. I call obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Now, to me, if there's a law there that says you should do something, you should do it. If you're going to a member of Parliament and you want some assistance, you don't need a consent form. If you're going to somebody who's not a member of Parliament and it's not listed in the other exceptions, then you have to fuck them all get a consent form. Isn't it that obvious? It is to me. So that's one of the things that's been bugging me. So while I was doing all the musing about that bullshit that I haven't got sorted out yet, but, I want to get it sorted out, it occurred to me that I haven't, in all of the stuff I've dealt with SISIP and VAC and the pensions and all these idiots, I've never gotten into how this has caused pain and suffering for my family. So I started to write out a short letter. I thought, now I'm up to 4 pages of how the government's actions have harmed my family. So, for example, I got approved for the Canada Pension Plan Disability, even though it was against the law. Now, people might say, what do you complain about? Well, you should have made a law, like I said before. If you need 4 out of 6 years to get qualified for the Canada Pension Plan Disability, now it used to be 2 out of 3. But in 1998, the government changed that to make it harder to get, to save money. So they moved it to 4 out of 6 years. Now, I got 4 applications for the Canada Pension that I made. The first one, the doctor forgot to fill out his part of the form, so they denied me. The second time, they just denied me. The third time, they denied me, and they sent me a letter that I didn't open for 3 years. So on the 26th of July, 2013, Service Canada sent me a letter and said, thank you for your application. You are denied. You did not have the 4 out of 6 years minimum qualification period requirement. Now, had I known about this letter, if I had opened it, and I didn't have brown envelope syndrome, because you're always getting shit from the government, so you don't want to open it and realize that, yeah, you were expecting shit and you got shit. So I opened it up in 2016, and I see that I should never have gotten it. Now back the truck up a bit, because I had been approved in 2014, not long after this denial letter. That was right. So I calls up Service Canada. I said, listen, I finally opened up this letter. Am I reading it right that I shouldn't have gotten the Canada Pension Plan in 2014 because you told me categorically in 2013 that I couldn't get it? Oh, yes, she said, you're right. Now, I got on the phone and I told SISIP to fuck off. I told Sun Life to fuck off. I told the Public Service Pension to fuck off. And I told the Reserve Force Pension Plan to fuck off. And they'd all have to start reinstating the bridging payment and the Canada Pension Plan Disability clawbacks. Then nothing happened for 2 weeks. So I called up Service Canada and said, what's on the go? I expect to get a letter from you saying that, we approve you improperly and therefore you owe us this much money. Now, I would have had to pay them back, maybe. I had a few arguments there to tell them to go fuck themselves. But instead of that, they said that lady was mistaken. Everything was done fine. Now, forget the fact that she didn't give me any reason for it, which I never thought of at the time because I was so shocked. But one of those two people is negligent, you see. either the person who was telling me that, oh, I shouldn't have got approved, they were right, and there was no mistake made by her in saying I was right, or the person that tried to cover it up by saying that other lady was wrong. Well, one of the two is guilty of negligence, a tort. See? Now, that caused me a lot of shit and abuse. Now, another example was related to my Sun Life. Now, I was in the military. I was still trying to get back into service and trying to get back to work with CRA. So I entered into a return to work agreement with Sun Life. And the agreement was to work a couple of days a week with the military, 6 or 7 or 8 days a month with the military, serve in the military. And then hopefully I get used to being back in the swing and I get back to my civilian job. Sounds reasonable, right? Except for the fact that the military doesn't like people who are disabled still there. So I had gone to the doctor in the military and they put medical employment limitation on me. They said I couldn't go out in the field, no FTXs. I couldn't go on a UN posting and something else. So the thing is those were put on my file. Now, later, I went out to a road move in February. Drove around trucks to burn up the budget, basically. Because if they don't use the budget, they don't get an extra. Now, then I get a recorded warning for violating the medical employment limitations the doctor imposed. It wasn't a field training exercise, like they said. However, so I called up the colonel and I asked for a meeting to discuss the harassment I was getting from my immediate superior. Goes in and instead of me getting to discuss and ask to be removed from his command, I get a recorded warning from the colonel for breaching the medical employment limitations. Now, I started to smile at the incongruity of what was happening. I called for a meeting. At the meeting I called, I got a recorded warning. The colonel says, wipe that smirk off your face. I said, I'm not smirking, sir. I said, I asked for this meeting to discuss Captain Sullivan's harassment. And you co-opted it. You took it away. And now it's about me being punished. Now, that was a terrible year, okay? 2010, Dad died, my 2 aunts died, and I got sick down in Cuba, and all that shit was happening. So, I came back, they called me up, the colonel did one day, and, I was I get to the breach of privacy that I was talking about, and upset my family. So I went and talked to Colonel Sullivan after this recorded warning and tried to smooth it over, and at the end of the conversation on a Thursday night, a reservist parade, Thursday night in the weekends usually, he sneaks a question at the end, and I don't think there was a right answer. He says, are you still working with CRA? Now, one of the symptoms, I'll call it, of obsessive-compulsive personality disorder is you can't lie. Not easily, anyway. I said, no, boy, I'm off and I'm on Sun Life disability. Now, I thought that was the end of it. He asked the question. I answered it. That was it. Monday morning, I got an email from Sun Life, and they went aboard of me saying I wasn't reporting this and I wasn't doing that, so I called them fuckers up. And I said, listen here, who called you? What was their authority to call you? And I blasted them a bit more, and did you ever see them back the fuck down? A few hours later, I get a call from the colonel. Now, I'm off duty. I wasn't serving. Here I get a call from DND, Department of National Defense, the colonel. He says, Matt, I want you to go see the doctor about your delusion complex, or I'm trying to remember the medical, he's not a doctor. He called me crazy, basically. Told me I was delusional. I listened to the bullshit. Then at the end of the call, I said, listen, sir, I'll go to that, medical appointment, like I said. First, I had him confused because I said, well, give me that order in writing. Tell me exactly why you think that I'm not competent enough to be a commissioned officer. He couldn't answer. I took pity on him and said, okay, I'll go anyway. But thing is I got mixed up with, I wrote down 8:30 on a piece of paper. I put 9:30 in my Google Calendar, and I showed up for the appointment wrong, on the wrong day. The right day at the wrong time. Doctor had gone already. So I go into the office, and I didn't want to sign in, but I was in uniform, ordered to attend a medical exam, so I had to go in. I went in, and I signed in, and I hoped to get out of there without any hassle. Nope. Sergeant Squires, or Warrant Officer Squires maybe, and the battalion order rooms. Oh, sir, Captain Sullivan would like to see you, or the colonel maybe. So the colonel goes aboard of me, and he's there, and I thought I was right, so I didn't back down. Why weren't you there? You trying to make me look bad, blah, blah, fucking blah. And I told you 8:30 and you didn't show up when I was there. Thought he was trying to fuck me over. So I said, you didn't tell me 8:30, sir. I have it in my Google Calendar, 9:30. Now, after that conversation, I then get double teamed and I go into Captain Sullivan's office. He calls me in. He goes aboard of me too, and I'm a captain. He's a captain. I didn't take too much, but I was talking to him, trying to whatever. I said, listen, John, you know what really pisses me off about this entire thing is you call Sun Life and you put my family's long-term disability insurance in jeopardy, okay? You didn't have to do that. You could have called me if you had questions on the weekend or on a Monday morning, and you could have said, Matt, what's up with this? You said you're on long-term disability. Well, how can you be serving as a soldier? And I would have said, well, I'm on a return to work agreement, and this is supposed to help me get better enough for my job at CRA. But instead of that, you went through the trouble of tracking down my case manager at Sun Life, Christine Rooney. You contacted them, breached my privacy, and you put my benefits in jeopardy. I said, that's not right. I didn't do that. I said, I have an email and a conversation with Christine Rooney that says you called them first, because they tried to say Sun Life called them for information first. They reversed it just like the Russians do over in Ukraine. Then he leaned across the desk and he said, so what if I did? I'm proud that I never smacked him right between the two fucking eyes like I wanted to at that time. He admitted that he had breached my privacy. He had put my benefits in jeopardy just to make my life miserable. Now, getting back to the family thing, that was my family long-term disability. It was insurance is always bought for when the worst happens, you see? And I'll tie it into the other thing I was going to mention. I'll probably mention in a future broadcast. Back in 1964, on the 9th of November, Minister Judy LaMarche was talking about the benefits of Canada Pension Plan Disability. And she said, instead of relying on it needs, like someone needs help, they'll have help as of right when the beloved breadwinner becomes disabled. Now, back then, there was probably only one person working in the family. So if the breadwinner, which was usually the man, became disabled, then they needed help. Now, you could go to the provincial welfare system and get help, but with the Canada Pension Plan Disability, you were supposed to get help as of right, because it was supposed to be a pension which paid you because you have a right to the pension when you become disabled. Now, somehow, over the years, that has been warped, twisted, so that many people believe the Canada Pension Plan Disability is a form of welfare. Only 35 to 40% of the people get approved for it, and it should be 100%. Okay, you paid into a pension, which in the CP Rail versus whatever, a 1973 Supreme Court of Canada case, it was about the Canada Pension Plan, and they said there are many forms of insurance, and basically the Canada Pension Plan is a social insurance. Okay, when you pay into the Canada Pension Plan, first thing you got to do is apply for a social insurance number. Then, at the end of it, you get a pension, which is part of that social insurance plan. You see? But all of these people want to save money, okay? So the Canada Pension Plan, they don't want to spend money when they don't have to, so they made strict rules about who gets it sometimes. The insurance companies, they want to offload the cost. So if they can get somebody else to pay and they claw back, then they get away with something, don't they? They get to take your insurance premiums without ever having to pay, which is a violation, as I said before, of the Merida principles. Anyway, let me clue up. I ended up not getting a hold of the MP, so I started calling around. I called the Royal Canadian Legion Service Officer, and I said, listen, do you guys help anybody that's not part of Legion who has a problem? Yes. Okay. Well, I've been talking to a member of Parliament before, not recently, to ignore me, but I'm trying to get them to assist with my service attribution problem. Okay? SISIP only pays a disabled reservist when they were injured in service. I was approved for SISIP in 2013, retroactive to 2012. So I had the Department of National Defense telling me that I was injured in service. Then, because I didn't get it very quick, and I went down to Veterans Affairs, they put me on the rehabilitation program. And they said I was injured in service, and they listed 5 medical conditions on the rehabilitation record of decision. Are you with me so far? I said to them. But they took me off. They canceled my rehabilitation in 2013 because they said they couldn't get in contact with me. Now, that has serious ramifications. I said I didn't get the increase for the reservists in 2015 because I wasn't in the system. I didn't get the increase in 2016 because I wasn't in the system. I probably didn't get the permanent impairment allowance because I wasn't in the system, but some veterans on SISIP only did get that Veterans Affairs payment. So, I mean, it's just not fair. It's not right. It's disrespectful. Like the government talks about recognition of veterans for their injury in service. They just want to have lip service. They don't want to really recognize things. Like, going back, because my mind is kind of whirling around right now, look at the Pension Act. For 80-odd years or 90 years, that was a law that conditioned people. So people were conditioned that it was a payment that was tax-free. People were conditioned that the Canada Pension Plan wasn't deducted. People were conditioned that the Canadian Forces pension wasn't deducted. People were conditioned that the Service Income Support Insurance Plan wasn't to be deducted from the Pension Act. People were also conditioned, saying I was talking about family, that there was a children's pension and a spouse's pension. Now, as an aside, before I get sidetracked and distracted, these are separate pensions. They might be put with the pensioner's money, but they are actually a different award. Okay? I stress that for the people that might become divorced and are getting a pension. See, sometimes it gets included as the veteran's income, and it gets grossed up for taxes because they believe, the judges believe, that it's tax-free. No, it isn't. It's based on the after-tax income of a public servant. If you base something on the after-tax income, you can't tell me it's tax-free. If you base it on the gross tax, yeah, you can tell me it's tax-free then if you don't have to pay taxes on it. If you base it on the gross salary, tell me I'm wrong, okay? I don't think I am. So the upshot of all this is that I'm not very impressed with my member of parliament. I sent him a tweet today. I haven't used Twitter in 3 or 4 or 5 years, but I haven't been able to get in touch with his staff. I even went over there on last Thursday, and I tried to get, maybe it was, anyway, I went over there, but I forgot my phone, and when I got there, it was locked. I couldn't call them to see if they're there and come down and get me, because I didn't have my phone. But they should have some kind of buzzer if they got it there for security purposes. They can buzz someone in after you talk to them or something. But I even called Prime Minister Trudeau's office. And I said, you know, it's not a very good thing in a democracy. I left a voicemail. When I can't get a hold, a voter wants to get a hold to the member of parliament who is his political representative, and it appears that they're avoiding him. Have my member of parliament contact me. So, I mean, I can't think of anything but these people don't want to talk to Captain Retired Matt Edwards. Part of it, I think, is that I don't accept their bullshit. Going back to the CRA consent thing. If any other person in the world had said, why am I doing this? They would have said, CRA said we have to, and there you go. People would have agreed. That's okay. But I wrote a column about that, about the tail wagging the dog. I was so pissed off, so upset about this bullshit about the executive branch of government telling the members of parliament what to do when it should be the boss, the elected members of parliament who make laws, should be telling the executive what to do because they are the boss. Okay? It's not up to CRA to tell the member of parliament that they need to fill in a consent form. Now, I've been running through what their rationale may be. I think if someone asks, and I mean to ask CRA, I left a voicemail. Actually, I sent an email to the CRA Access to Information Coordinator. And what is the legal justification for CRA to ask for a consent form? Now, they're going to think they're really proud of their intelligence. And they're going to say the law requires that we get a consent form. Then I'm going to say, which law is that? Then they're going to say the Privacy Act. And then I'm going to say, which section are you talking about? Then they're going to say, well, Section 8. It says that you have to have a consent form. Section 8.1. Well, then I'm going to say you can't just stop reading at Section 8.1. What about Section 8.2? What does Section 8.2 of the Privacy Act do? It sets out specific exceptions to the normal general rule that a consent form is required. And what does Section 8.2a say? That if you have similar programs, and the government has collected information already, like the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, then you don't need to collect it at Veterans Affairs. See? Now, Section 8.2g is the exception for the Member of Parliament trying to help a constituent with their problem. So in all other cases, yes, ask for a consent form. If a private individual wants to help someone with their taxes, CRA is perfectly within their rights to insist the law be obeyed. But not when a specific exception is specifically accepted, God damn it. It's crazy. It's like these people don't have a clue about anything except when they stop reading when they see the part that thinks that authorizes what they are doing. But that's not right. Same thing like I was telling the MP and a few other people about the Reserve Force Pension Plan, the fact that, well, this was my conversation with the Office of the Veterans Ombudsman. I said, I don't know if it's your jurisdiction, but I said, I had trouble getting my Reserve Force Pension Plan. I said, I noticed that there was a difference in the definition between the regular force person in the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, Section 2, which says that a person is disabled when they cannot do their own trade. And in the Reserve Force Pension Plan, it says that you had to be unable to do any job, not just your own trade in the military. I said, you can't have a law, one act. One is the act and one is regulation. Regulations are subservient to the act. You can't have the definition, the same word being defined in different ways in one fucking act. But they have done it. And then I said, they wanted me to get my Canada pension plan first. And then, this was in 2012, and I wasn't approved for Canada Pension Plan, see? So I didn't get that to 2014. So they wanted me to get Canada Pension Plan. I told the OVO lady, she's a media advisor type person, high up in, not, just the person who calls the 1-800 line. So I said, if you apply for the Canada Pension Plan and you get it, well, you won't get your bridging. But if you apply for the Canada Pension Plan, you don't get approved for the Canada Pension Plan, you won't get your Reserve Force Pension Plan, and you don't get your pension and bridging. In both cases, you'll never get bridging. But I said there are two different acts. There are two different acts authorizing both of these pensions. They have different rates, they have different vesting periods, they have different ways to calculate the pension. They're not supposed to be. I said they're basically stealing the certification. The Canadian Forces Superannuation Act should be paying for the adjudication of a person who became disabled and has to get a pension, but instead they're offloading the cost to the Canada Pension Plan. That's not right, I told her. So it's nuts. They shouldn't be doing all of these things. I said I could look at this as a criminal offense because I wanted my property back. Pensions are property. So when I asked for my pension and they didn't give it to me, they said I could take a deferred annuity at age 65, or I could take a return of contributions. When I was talking to the agent, I said, well, where's the immediate annuity? I was medically released. I should get my pension. Oh, no. You only have two choices. You can ask for a deferred annuity, or you can ask for a return of contributions. Now, I fought with them pricks for 6 months, I swear, until I finally came to a policy guy that said, you're getting the Public Service Superannuation Act, and that has a definition of disability that's very similar to Canada Pension Plan disability. So you know what? We're going to approve your Canadian Forces Reserve Force Pension Plan. Now, what good did it do me? None. I fought with them because it was principle. I should get my property back. But I was getting SISIP, and they promptly reduced my insurance because I fought with the government for 9 months and got my pension. I thought of recently, just to rub it in their nose, and I would piss them off, send them in a bill for all the time and effort, billable hours for all that effort to get my pension that caused them to get a reduction in my insurance, because I would have been just as well off with the status quo if I hadn't got my pension, which is the same thing as the Canada pension plan and stuff. Anyway, listen, I'm rambling on. I think this was a bit more disjointed, but I tried to keep it all, tight. One of these days, I'll try to publish that book I got written, maybe. I'm thinking about adding a few more things to it, because since I've written it, I've discovered other things. It's crazy what they're doing, and what they're doing is, if I wanted to put this into a generalization, what's happening? They're gaslighting us, okay? Remember Parliament staff got one route. When I say they're clawing back this, they're clawing back that, man, that's what they always do. I said, I don't care if what they always do. They're not supposed to do it. It's illegal. Oh, if it's illegal, they wouldn't be doing it. But they are. That's the problem, okay? You don't write laws and then not enforce them. If you write a law and don't enforce it, then why'd you fucking write the law in the first place, okay? Okay, don't. Just keep your pen in your pocket. Don't write the law, and then you won't give us expectations that the law will be obeyed, okay? It's nuts. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week with another installment.